Hey everyone, this is GQ Recommends.
And today we're going to be talking about everything you need to know to buy your first watch.
Today we are going to be splitting watches up into two big categories which really divide the purposes of these watches. So we're going to start with dress watches and then move into sport watches, which has a much larger field of subcategories because these things are so purpose-built for the job that they're supposed to be doing.
I think at the end of the day, if you're buying your first watch, the only thing to care about, and correct me if I'm wrong, is like you just have to be really into the watch you're buying. You have to love it. You're gonna ideally wear this a lot. You know, no one needs to wear a watch. You have a phone in your pocket that can do it perfectly well. So if you're gonna buy a watch, you want something that you want to put on every day.
I think getting something that you are happy to see every day is so critical, especially if you're buying your first watch.
A good watch is never gonna go out of style. So when you're talking about dress watches, you're talking about a very traditional idea of a watch, right? This is gonna be something that is on a leather strap typically. It's gonna be a finer, fancier metal. You're gonna see a lot of gold.
When you talk about sports watches, there's so much like the history and the provenance and the stories behind these watches. You're gonna see that a lot less in dress watches. You know that Steve McQueen wears a certain Cartier tank, but it's not gonna have that same sense of like historic achievement that, you know, a Rolex Oyster Perpetual was like the first watch that accompanied the first trek up Everest. Like a dress watch isn't gonna have that kind of like mythical story behind it.
Its whole job is to just look really nice.
Dress watches, like any other watch category, will come at a lot of different price points. So if you only wanna spend, you know, a couple $100s, the Timex Marlin is like a really cool watch. But then, you know, you eventually start bumping up to the watches with like really fine craftsmanship. No offense to the Timex Marlin, of course. The first watch I really like is this Longines flagship Heritage. The Bridgerton guy, Roger Jean Page, just wore this watch. It looks great. The black dial, I really like a black dial for a dress watch because like you're out at night. You're wearing it with probably like a black tuxedo or like a midnight blue tuxedo. So you want to have sort of that.
No regular suits, just tuxedos.
Just tuxedos, maybe a suit, you know, if you are really dressing down for your gala.
If you're talking dress watches, you kind of can't not talk about the Cartier tank. Like every kind of awesome celebrity you can think of, right, has worn a Cartier tank.
Every
at one
like
point
type,
or another.
every like archetype of a celebrity that you would want to have.
Muhammad Ali.
Huge tank guy. And then you move to like British royalty. Princess Diana was very devoted to wearing her tank. Founder of Cartier was apparently just having his morning coffee and he was looking at his paper and there were these overhead shots of these tanks like in World War I storming this city, and he liked the overhead view. That's sort of the story behind how it got its like rectangular boxy shape. And it became so popular that people just started replicating. It's just called like a tank style watch. And this is a watch that, you know, Tiffany & Co. had made by Movado in the 40s because Cartier was like so influential in defining this shape as one of the preeminent designs if you were gonna have a dress watch. It's just a timeless classic watch. Now we're gonna talk about expensive watches which are really defining in this category. The one that I really love is this Vacheron. It's so defining of a dress watch. It's a plain dial made out of gold.
That's a watch, you know, and it's not until you get real close to it and get a good look at it that you have a sense of just how fancy it is. It's like a discreet kind of luxury,
discreet,
right?
yeah.
Like that's true luxury, man.
It doesn't have any complication. It's just completely a time-only watch, which I think is so traditional. Like most of the Cartier tanks are going to be time-only as well because you don't need the chronographs or the busy dials or the annual calendar or even the date. It's just meant to look beautiful. Dive watches, as the name tells you, are meant for diving, and they've come up with like a bunch of different rules that guide what is and what isn't a dive watch. You know, it has to handle salt water, it has to be able to dive at least 100 meters, it has to be shock resistant. You know, it comes with all of these different parameters that just to be a dive watch you have to meet.
They're made out of steel, they've got a steel bracelet or maybe a rubber strap. Like these watches are designed to take a beating. So when you're talking about dive watches, if we go like word association, and I say dive watch, you say?
Submariner.
How'd you know? So tell me about the Rolex Submariner.
It is the probably like archetypal defining dive watch. We'll use the Rolex little brother as an example. Like the defining characteristics of a dive watch on a dial are you're always going to have this triangle at the top, the batons at 3, 6, and 9, and then the rest of them are going to be circles because, you know, when you're underwater, you just want to glance at something quickly. And that started with the Submariner.
Sports watches are the most popular watches on Earth. Submariner is, of those watches, you know, one of the like 2 or 3 or 4 most popular. And unlike some of them, has been one of the couple most popular for 20, 30, 40 years, right? This was like a James Bond watch at one point. If we're talking about an affordable dive watch, there's basically one name you start with, and that's Seiko. Seiko is a Japanese brand that makes, you know, everything from like a $200 watch, dress or sport, all the way up to, you know, watches that cost many thousands of dollars. This is a Seiko Prospex dive watch. It's the like family it lives in. It's a nice, not too big size, which, you know, with dive watches you tend to see like kind of beefier, bulkier watches. This one's a little more compact. Got that bezel to track, you know, how long you've been underwater or, you know, when the parking meter is going to come up. And it's got those little hits of orange just so you can see what's going on in the dark or, you know, at the bottom of the ocean, that sort of thing. And then if you want to go a little fancier in the category, this is Tudor's Black Bay, which is like, this is a signature watch for Tudor, and Tudor's a really cool company, right? Just a really, really sturdy stainless steel dive watch. You know, this is like a big like David Beckham watch, right?
If you are looking to get your first watch,
if you want to invest in a first watch,
if you want to invest, Tudor, like you're not going to find a lot of things in that price range that are better than that.
What watch is this?
This is the Omega Seamaster Ultra Deep. It has earned that name. This one, just like the standard size, can dive to 6,000 meters, which is outrageous. But just recently, for its 2022 releases, Omega put out a new version of the Ultra Deep based on the watch that traveled to the bottom of the Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean. Now Omega can say, we have the watch that dove further than any watch has and went to the deepest point of the ocean.
Cam, tell me about racing watches.
Racing watches or chronograph watches, or the reason it's called the Rolex Daytona is because they would give it out as a prize for the winner of the Daytona.
We're talking legendary drivers, legendary cars.
And they also, you know, like a dive watch, have their own distinctive qualities. It's always going to have a chronograph that's like essential to this watch. You know, the bezel most often is going to have a tachymeter.
Here, why don't we start with this guy?
Yeah.
So this is the Tag Heuer Monaco, famous racing watch. Monaco is, of course, like famous like home for racing. And this is famously the watch worn by Steve McQueen in his movie Le Mans.
And the story behind this is that he was consulting an actual professional driver, and he saw that the guy wore a Tag Heuer Monaco, so he requested that the guy handling props and costumes get him a Monaco too.
What else we got? We have another striking navy blue watch here.
When you're talking about watches, the Omega Speedmaster is one of the most iconic watches because it went through this rigorous testing from NASA. It was the only one approved for in-flight travel, and it worked out well, the timing for them, because they got to be the first watch that went to the moon.
So when you want to talk about like the top end of the market, boy, can we ever do that, right? I think we could call the Rolex Daytona one of the most popular watches on Earth the last couple years.
You know, Paul Newman wore a specific variation of this watch, and when it came up for auction a couple years ago, it set the record at the time for like almost $18 million, which like, that's what we talk about when we talk about sport watches. It's not selling because like it's gold or the complication or anything like that. It's sold like that because it has this amazing history inside of it.
There's a Daytona that's like the John Mayer Daytona, right?
Yeah, the green dial, the money green. The John Mayer and the Paul Newman, what they have in common is that when they were first released, people didn't really like them that much, which is part of the reason that the specific Paul Newman is so desirable, because people didn't like it as much, Rolex didn't make as many of them, and now, 30, 40 years later, they're a lot more difficult to find.
Paul Newman also famous for his song, Your Body is a Wonderland.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're gonna talk about pilot watches.
A pilot watch is gonna have like big, huge numerals. So they're also like, for the gloves, they typically have like really big crowns, because like if you have a gloved finger and you're trying to like...
We're talking like exposed cockpit flying, basically, right? This is like if you're flying, these were designed for pilots who, like, when they were flying, were in the elements.
Yes, we're in the elements, yeah.
So a couple of the more popular pilot watches. Breitling is a brand sort of like famously associated with aviation, right?
Yeah, they made watches for like different pilots associations. You know, if you are into a dial like that, like super design heavy dial.
This is like an old school computer on your wrist, basically.
Exactly.
You can do calculations on it.
You have people who are like really dedicated to Breitling. I think it's cultivated like such a cool fan base of like Jerry Seinfeld loves these watches, which makes sense because there's Breitling for Bentley. Breitling does a collaboration with a motorcycle brand. So you get also like a lot of automotive stuff in here. I see where Jerry Seinfeld kind of like falls into that. Harrison Ford like loves Breitling too, which that makes a lot of sense. He's like a hobbyist pilot.
Yes, famously so.
Another really fun brand when it comes to pilot watches is Bell & Ross, which actually would like, they made all their dials inspired by, you know, what you would see on the dashboard of a cockpit. So like they kind of just lifted that straight from a plane and like made it into a watch.
Looks like a gauge, right? Like,
yeah, exactly, right? One brand when you're talking about pilot watches that's important to bring up is IWC. They make this iconic big pilot's watch. It's like so emblematic of what a pilot's watch is. It has the big crown on it. It has the big legible numerals. It has another big feature of a pilot's watch is the little triangle at 12 o'clock, because if you're upside down, I guess, in an airplane and are like trying to orient yourself on your wrist, like you always know that like that's the top of the watch where that triangle is.
The sign of a great pilot's watch is that, like, you know, Denzel Washington in flight, flipping the plane upside down would be able to read it, right?
Yeah, exactly. The last big category that we want to talk about when it comes to sport watches is field watches, super purpose-built, like the Explorer 2, which is made specifically for spelunking. So the whole thing is like designed with a luminous hand so that like when you're deep in a cave, like really specific tools so that if you're diving a cave, you have like a watch to go with it, you know?
Military issue watches too, right? Like tend to be field watches, you know, sort of like khaki, green, nylon strap, really tough, hard wearing.
Like one of the more popular brands, Marathon. It's a really inexpensive watch and they did a recent collaboration with J.Crew, but like people didn't know about it because to this day, like 90% of its business just comes from government contracts. This is what the military wears. They wear a Marathon watch because it's hard wearing and durable, and it's not fussy because you just kind of want to know the time.
Set it and forget it.
Yeah.
Hamilton, famous American brand, right? You know, super sturdy, reasonably priced. You're gonna get a mechanical watch that's gonna be super solid. You know, great investment if you're looking for a first watch. White t-shirt and jeans kind of watch.
You know, also in the mid-range category, again, another one of those great French names I love pronouncing, Mont Blanc. This Geosphere watch that has the two subdials are actually dedicated to showing the northern and southern hemisphere. And if you see this thing in action, those little pictures are actually like rotating to try and, I believe what it does is tell you about the time zones. And so you can keep track of, you know, what the time is in every single one of the time zones.
Incredibly cool, and obviously the bezel, instead of having numbers, has the four, you know, cardinal directions, right?
Yeah.
So if you, I think you probably need a compass on you, but you can adjust to like point it in roughly that direction. You can just follow your.
Right. That's something that you would want for a field watch if you're just like out in, you know, no man's land.
You get a lot of stuff on the bezel, right? Like you look at the Explorer 2, right, which is Rolex's cave diving watch, and that's got the 24-hour bezel, and so it's got a GMT hand like the other GMT watch, and you can use that for another time zone, or you can use it if you're going to be underground for more than 24 hours to figure out how long, you know, if you've been there for inside 12 hours or over 12 hours, because you can only go around once.
Yeah, if you're in a cave, you don't want to be like, is it AM or PM?
Famously, Rolex Explorer 2 wearer Prince Harry.
But I mean, you see like just really fashionable people are attracted to the Rolex Explorer 2. It's such a funny thing that like a watch made for spelunking also is like Megan Rapinoe and like Balenciaga wants to wear a Rolex Explorer 2 with that outfit. I think it's like such a handsome watch.
Every watch we've seen here you could have worn 50 years ago probably, and you could wear 50 years in the future, I think.
That's another just beautiful thing about watches, is that it's an investment. You're buying it to wear it for a long, long time, and either to pass that thing down or to trade it in for the next one that you love.
So that's how to buy your first watch. Thank you guys for watching.